Thank you for joining today's virtual learning session, What Your Company Needs to Know, LGBTQ Employees and the COVID-19 Pandemic. My name is Madeline Pro, and I'm a Senior Associate of Communications here at Out & Equal. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Before we get started on today's webinar, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. We will be recording today's session, and we will provide a copy of the recording, as well as a copy of the slides in a follow-up email. Please feel free to share these materials with your colleagues and friends that couldn't join today's session. You've noticed by now that all of your lines are muted. We will save the last 10 minutes of today's call for a Q&A session, so please submit your questions using the question function on Zoom, and we'll get to them at the end of the call. Once again, your lines are all muted, so please enter your questions using the question function on Zoom, and we will get to them shortly. If you have any questions after the call, you can reach us directly at hello@outandequal.org. And if you're looking at your screen now, you'll see the email address on the screen. But once again, it is hello@outandequal.org. Additionally, if you're having any technical difficulties, you can reach out to us via the question and answer box or the Zoom chat function, and our team will assist you. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dina Fadas.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon and good evening. As I see, we have hundreds of people on the line across the globe. Thank you all for joining us for what is the first in a series of virtual platforms, learning spaces, and community conversations we are launching now through 2020. My name is Dina Fadas, and I have a dual role here at Out & Equal, Managing Director and Chief Program and Partnerships Officer. No doubt, we're all thrown into this storm of grief, anxiety, and difficulty amidst the global COVID pandemic. It's affected our Out & Equal family and partners around the world. There's a lot of uncertainty right now, but there are also some certainties. This pandemic will come to an end. We will emerge from it forever changed. And for so many of our partners, we want to let you know that we are not going anywhere. The vital work of supporting inclusion and belonging is now put to the test and more important than ever. That's why we're generating more resources and virtual platforms to support you and hear from you. Excuse me. Today, we're talking about the particular challenges the LGBTQ community faces in dealing with this pandemic. COVID-19 is an equal opportunity disease, to be sure. It crosses ages, geographies, races, genders, and more. But there are differently felt effects of the disease based on social and structural inequality. We know, for example, that people of color, particularly Black Americans, are disproportionately affected by COVID and accounting right now for outsized numbers of fatalities and hospitalizations due to a web of pre-existing structural inequalities. We also know and have joined in coalition and programming to combat the rise of xenophobia, hate crimes, and harassment targeting Asian Americans. And so all of these are overlays to our topic today, considerations for LGBTQ employees. This discussion and the accompanying resource can help you locate challenges you're having as well as solutions. It can also be leveraged to frame proactive conversations internally. We know that we will emerge from this crisis stronger if we consider the unique impact points across employee segments. That's not just the compassionate point of view, it's also good business sense. We are all grappling with questions of supporting business continuity. Upfront investments in your company or agency's number one asset, your people, will yield dividends well after the crisis passes. So thank you all for your time and commitment today. And now I would like to turn to Madeline Jelpe to kick off the resource.
Thanks so much for that, Dina, and thank you all so much for joining today. Before we get into the meat of our presentation today, we first want to take this opportunity to learn more about your experiences as employees during this time. We've been hearing from folks how you all have been uniquely impacted across the world, some needing to work from home, others being furloughed, and unfortunately some losing their jobs. We're all uniquely impacted by this pandemic. So at this time, before we jump into the resource itself, we'd like to hear from you. How has COVID-19 affected you as an employee? Please let us know in the chat box below. I'm going to read a few of the comments as they come in, and we'd just love to get your perspective on this. And I'll wait for some of those comments to come in. Managing staff remotely, okay. Great, any others? Loss or decrease in benefits, bonuses, matching retirement, etc. Mental health, focus, productivity have all taken a turn for the worse. Working from home as an extrovert, reduced pay, managing work-life balance, fortunately still employed, working from home for foreseeable future. There's a lot of great responses coming in. I encourage you all to check these out in the comments to see how your colleagues are being affected by this crisis. I still have to come in sometimes and work from home, work at a faster pace and under more stress than ever. Finance furloughed. These are all really important things to share, and thank you all so much. We will be touching on a few of these things during our call, as you know, this pandemic has affected us all in different ways. We encourage you to continue to use the chat box as we go through our presentation today and let us know how this relates to you. If you have questions, we encourage you to use the Q&A as well so we can continue to get your insights throughout the presentation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Madeline, who's going to walk us through the rest of the resources for now.
Thank you, Madeline. So to jump right into the presentation for today, we want to go over a couple of items that employers should be aware of, consider, and what employers could potentially do for their LGBTQ employees during COVID-19. The first item for employers to be aware of and to consider for the LGBTQ community is that COVID-19 presents challenges to employees that are living with HIV or AIDS. According to the CDC, all individuals with underlying medical conditions or individuals who are immunocompromised are at a higher risk for contracting COVID-19 and are more likely to have serious symptoms. People living with HIV or AIDS have weakened immune systems and have a harder time fighting off infections, and this makes individuals with these conditions more vulnerable to coronavirus. And as we all know, COVID-19 is continuing to disrupt day-to-day life. For people with HIV or AIDS, this can affect treatment plans, access to necessary medical supplies, and can deeply impact mental and physical health. So what can employers consider for their employees living with HIV or AIDS? We know that the LGBTQ community exhibits higher rates of HIV and AIDS, with transgender people 5 times more likely than the general population to be living with HIV. Because of the serious health concerns, people living with HIV or AIDS might feel pressure to disclose their status in order to convince their employers to let them stay at home. This can also cause anxiety around performing daily job functions that require them to leave their homes or interact with people. And as you can imagine, the anxiety of leaving the house at this time or disclosing one's status in itself can cause a lot of stress and fear surrounding stigma and relationships at work. So what can you as an employer do for your LGBTQ or non-LGBTQ employees with HIV or AIDS? First, try to make reasonable accommodations for your employees living with autoimmune issues such as HIV or AIDS. This can also include employees who live with or care for individuals with these concerns. It's important to remain flexible and patient during this time and try to accommodate requests as they come in. Companies should also ensure their employees that they will not be judged or reprimanded for needing specific accommodations. Employees should always feel overwhelming inclusion and support and belonging in the workplace, and that is especially now. Going on to the second item for employers to consider is that employers should know that when it comes to COVID-19 and the LGBTQ community, that the community as a whole is particularly vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19 because of the unique health challenges the community faces. LGBTQ individuals are more likely to have cancer, HIV or AIDS, weakened immune systems, and higher rates of asthma and respiratory illnesses. And as we covered in the first bucket just a second ago, chronic health issues are known to increase the complications associated with COVID-19, and this puts the community as a whole at a higher risk. Additionally, LGBTQ people, and particularly transgender and gender nonconforming individuals, regularly experience discrimination in the healthcare system. This can lead to individuals avoiding medical care when necessary or having traumatic experiences when seeking care. So what should employers consider? LGBTQ employees may have an increased need to take time off work to care for themselves, their partners, or their loved ones. LGBTQ individuals may also feel the need to take additional precautions to limit exposure to COVID-19, and this could impact typical or daily job functions. So what can you as an employer do for your LGBTQ employees? One way to support your LGBTQ employees is to continue to offer domestic partner benefits for both same and opposite sex partners. This can ensure that LGBTQ employees have the time they need to care for their partners if they fall sick. And as we know and covered, LGBTQ individuals have a heightened risk of exposure and serious symptoms for COVID-19. Therefore, they might need the time off and inclusive benefits now more than ever. It's also important for employers to be aware of unique family dynamics within the LGBTQ community when assessing the need to take time off work. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, Madeline Shelby, to continue with the resources.
Thanks, Madeline. Another important consideration to take into account is the differential impact that a lack of access to paid leave can have on LGBTQ individuals. So currently in the United States, we don't have national standards for paid family or sick leave. That's different than any other country, industrialized country. And while some states and companies have policies in place that ensure paid leave, what we're really dealing with here in the US is a patchwork system of policies that can often leave workers with the difficult reality of taking unpaid leave during the course of this outbreak. So currently, the majority of the country, 42 states, are under some sort of shelter in place or stay at home order. And in looking at the numbers, that's over nearly 320 Americans who are affected by this. So suffice it to say that workers across the country, I'm sure many of you on this call included, are contending with changes in their day-to-day work functions, some being forced to take unpaid leave. And so while these orders are absolutely necessary in containing the pandemic, it can and has resulted in tremendous financial hardships for employees who don't have adequate paid sick leave at their place of work. So what to consider? What does this mean for LGBTQ employees? In the face of the pandemic, inadequate paid leave policies also disproportionately affect LGBTQ employees who are more likely to live in poverty and to work in lower wage or hourly jobs. Just a couple weeks ago, actually, the Williams Institute found that 292,000 LGBTQ adults filed for unemployment benefits. And even that figure is likely much higher given that LGBTQ workers tend to be overrepresented in industries that are most impacted by COVID-19. So for example, HRC found that 5 million work in jobs that are more likely to be impacted by COVID-19. So 2 million LGBTQ workers working in restaurants and food services, 1 million who work in hospitals, almost 1 million who work in K-12 education, nearly 1 million who work in colleges and universities, and then 500,000 who work in retail. So in addition to that, LGBTQ folks are more likely to experience food insecurity and participate in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. 1.9 million LGBTQ adults participate in SNAP, while 3.1 million experience food insecurity. So what all these numbers indicate to us is these disproportionate challenges for the LGBTQ community when it comes to financial and economic stability. And while the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act, does provide some support in these areas, long-term financial instability can still have a deep impact. So for LGBTQ folks, especially who are already on the margins, losing one's job or having to leave could be financially devastating. And from that, we might see outcomes like extreme debt, poverty, and homelessness. The 2018 LGBTQ paid leave survey revealed that only 29% of LGBTQ respondents worked at companies that provided paid medical leave, while less than half of LGBTQ respondents, that's 45%, worked at companies with LGBTQ inclusive leave policies. In addition, you have 1 in 5 respondents who are even fearful of requesting time off for certain issues, including caring for a loved one, because they fear that might reveal LGBTQ identity. So what can you do about this? Now, while this may be a longer-term strategy, we encourage companies to amend your paid family and sick leave policies. The Family First Coronavirus Response Act, which was recently signed into law, does offer temporary paid benefits, longer-term family leave, which is great. However, it is not universal, unfortunately, and does include numerous exclusions. For instance, companies who have more than 500 employees are exempted from providing these benefits. So that's making the assumption that these larger companies will have some benefits in place for LGBTQ employees and others, when in fact, there are large gaps that exist. In response, many companies are amending their paid family and sick leave policies so employees can stay at home if they're feeling sick. Walmart recently did this. They implemented an emergency paid sick leave policy that would provide 2 weeks of pay for workers who are quarantined or at a location with mandatory quarantine. And it's policies like this that are going to be really crucial for LGBTQ workers needing to take time off of work during COVID. Another thing that you can do is confirm that these paid and unpaid leave policies are inclusive of LGBTQ individuals. So that means ensuring domestic partnerships are covered in your paid leave policies. As we've seen before, not all leave is inclusive of LGBTQ individuals. For example, family care may be restricted to legal guardians or spouses and might fail to include folks who are in domestic partnerships or other unique family dynamics. One last thing you can do is don't require a doctor's note. The CDC has advised businesses to demonstrate leniency with employees who need to use sick time due to respiratory illness. So that means foregoing requirements to provide a doctor's note to validate their absence. We all know this already, we've seen it in the news, but due to the overload of COVID cases, medical care providers are often constrained in their ability to provide these documents in a prompt manner. So those are a few things that you can do in this regard. Let's now dive into the impact COVID has on transgender and gender nonconforming employees. The transgender and gender community experience disparities in various areas of life outside care, employment, and overall health status. For example, 1 out of 5 transgender adults has at least 1 or more chronic condition, such as diabetes, arthritis, or asthma. And in addition to that, there is that reality of discrimination in the healthcare system that discourages many transgender and gender nonconforming folks from seeking out healthcare or accessing healthcare. Like these kinds of things can exacerbate existing disparities. And so there are many reasons why the transgender and gender nonconforming community are particularly impacted. So again, there's the discrimination and stigma in the healthcare industry that make trans people reluctant to seek out help. There's these existing barriers to access to healthcare, such as the lack of insurance that leaves us less likely to get medical care. And then those existing conditions mean that more of us live in a state of compromised health. So for non-conforming across the globe, the truth of the matter is critical services have been disrupted or delayed. Many hospitals and care facilities, again, are contending with that influx of COVID-19 patients, and many have become constrained in their ability to provide care. So this may disincline trans people to seek out services like hormone replacement therapy, or healthcare facilities simply may not be able to provide these services. So we've actually seen this already as surgeries considered non-essential have been postponed indefinitely or actually canceled in many cases. Among the surgeries deemed non-essential or elective are gender-affirming surgeries. In addition to that, many trans folks actually travel internationally for this surgery, which has also been significantly impacted at this time. What to consider, many of you on the call know this well, gender affirming surgery is a life-saving surgery. It's anything but elective. And in an NBC News report, one individual described the importance of surgery this way. They said, "This surgery is not cosmetic. It's about being comfortable enough to function." And that truly is the case for many transgender and gender nonconforming folks. And I think it really highlights one of the reasons why this is so important to consider when creating strategies to support your employees during this pandemic. In many cases, these are long-awaited surgeries. Transgender and gender non-conforming folks have gone through great lengths to set these up procedurally, logistically, and gender surgery and hormone replacement therapy can lead to a marked decrease in anxiety, depression, and suicidal behavior, in addition to significant improvements in gender dysphoria. So disruptions or cancellations in treatment, or even the additional barriers placed on accessing healthcare, can result in an increase in negative mental health outcomes, including, again, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and debilitating dysphoria. And that is compounded by the mental health effects already associated with COVID-19's isolation effect, anxiety around work, finances, relationships, and concerns about one's overall state of well-being. So for this reason, it's critical that employers consider how these additional challenges may make it more difficult for transgender and gender nonconforming employees to be fully engaged in the workplace. A few things that you can do to help as employers. Leverage ERGs as support systems. It's absolutely critical to support the mental health and well-being of your trans and non-binary employees during this time. And your ERGs are vital mechanisms and foundations on which to check in on your employees. So a recent study actually just came out that demonstrated the critical role ERGs are playing in the COVID-19 pandemic. They're allowing employees to better understand the needs and concerns of certain employee populations. In fact, nearly 40% of ERGs in the survey were playing this critical role in their company. So we do recommend that employers support and encourage ERG leaders to provide virtual programming and remote check-ins to build in safe spaces to share concerns, voice struggles, and gain assistance from peers. Another way that you can help as employers is providing reasonable accommodations and support. It's important at this time to be prepared to provide additional assistance and support to your transgender employees, especially those who are isolated and delays. This might come in the form of supporting or offering paid leave for mental health, accommodating remote work, and approving future leave once surgeries are rescheduled. It's also important that your employees are aware of and have access to their employee assistance programs. These can be really beneficial in providing a range of services like short-term counseling to employees who are dealing with these major life changes. Variety of resources out there as well to facilitate greater learning on these issues. NCTE, the National Center for Transgender Equality, has created a useful resource to help elucidate some of the impacts facing trans and non-binary folks as a result of COVID-19. That link will be posted in our references section. Okay. Not sure if the slide changed on your end, but now look at mental health. The virus itself, as well as the measures set in place to mitigate the impact of the virus. There we go. Showed up on my screen now. The virus itself, as well as the measures set in place to mitigate the impact.
And I think we had a little bit of technical difficulty, so I'm going to hop right in. Karina, if you don't mind going to the next slide, and then we'll bump back once Madeline joins. Great. So we're going to go over this item, and then when Madeline hops back on, we'll go back to LGBTQ people and mental health. So another item we want to go over with you all, and that employers should know and consider, is that COVID-19 has stark racial disparities when it comes to contracting the virus or having serious or fatal symptoms, and overall death rates. People of color are more likely to work frontline jobs, have limited access to healthcare, experience discrimination in the healthcare system, and are more likely to live in high-density homes or neighborhoods. Recently, several states released racial data that shines a light on the alarming racial disparity. In Michigan, Black Americans make up 14.1% of the state population, but an overwhelming 40% of coronavirus deaths. In Illinois, the infection rate among Black Americans make up 26% of the city, or no, I'm sorry, again in Milwaukee, Black Americans make up 26% of the city, but 81% of the deaths. And in Illinois, the infection rate among Black Americans is twice the percentage of the state population of Black Americans. In New York City, data shows that Latinos and Asians are being infected with and dying from COVID at a higher rate than any other New Yorkers. What should employers consider? It's important to know that people of color have higher rates of chronic medical conditions and social predispositions that increase the risk for COVID-19. Because of the severe health risks, people of color might need additional sick leave or time off to care for family members during this time. Understandably, employees of color may feel increased anxiety around performing job functions that require them to leave the home or interact with groups of people. What can you do to support employees of color? First, demonstrate flexibility and patience for all employees that are at a higher risk for COVID-19. This includes making reasonable accommodations and building cultures of support and trust. Employers should also leverage the company's People of Color ERG to ensure that staff are being supported and needs are being met. Additionally, be aware of unique family or household dynamics that could lead to an increased need for time off. And with that, it looks like Madeline hasn't hopped back on the line yet, so I'm going to pass it over to Dina. And as a reminder, we've seen so many questions coming in. Thank you all for your participation, and we're going to get to those in just a second. We will be sending around a recording of the call and a copy of the slide deck, so we will send that in a follow-up email. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dina.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And a reminder that all of the information here will be made available after this call in the form of a recording and the PowerPoint deck. And then, of course, this is all a direct lift from the very excellent resource that Out and Equal put out last week. As I mentioned at the top of the call, we've got participation from around the world, and this particular resource is one that's resonated, particularly in the APAC region and Latin America. So we are translating it into Japanese per request, into Portuguese, and also into Spanish. So for those of you who are in bi or multilingual work environments, this will soon be made available on the Out and Equal website. Karina, if we could go to the next slide, please. I want to also thank you. Thank those who have already put some questions into the chat box here. And I'm going to go ahead and lift one that is frankly of particular concern, and hopefully not one that is shared across the board, but if it is, let's put it on the table and talk about it. There's a question regarding coworkers not wanting to, even virtually, so to speak, let LGBTQ colleagues into their home. Depending on your jurisdiction, depending on your individual employer's policies, that right off the bat may very well be a violation of workplace anti-harassment, non-discrimination policy. Not giving that as legal advice, giving that as guidance for you to potentially talk to your human resource officer, your own manager, document the issues and any messages that you've received. We know that, strong, inclusive workplaces are ones that are best suited to translate that level of inclusion and support, even in new environments or virtual environments. And then conversely, we know that going virtual does not eliminate bias or discrimination that has occurred. Let me just check and see. Madeline Jelpy, are you available to pull out a couple more of the points broadly from the section on mental health? We've also got a request from one of our attendees.
Absolutely, yes. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, perfect, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dina and Karina. Would you mind going back to that mental health slide? Perfect. Apologies, everyone. We're all working with the realities of working from home now, and sometimes the internet does not work well with us. But this is a very important slide. I want to make sure that we go over it together. We're all dealing with the mental health effects of COVID-19. A recent poll actually found that 70% of Americans were experiencing major stressors from the pandemic, while actually more than a third of Americans report the coronavirus is having serious effects on their psychological health. And as we all know, that translates into physical implications as well, including disrupted sleep patterns, high heart rates, and gastrointestinal issues, as well as those additional effects on our individual focus, productivity, memory, and even our relationships. So I know that probably at least a few of you on the call are experiencing those now. And so it's important for companies to look at how these measures may be affecting your employees, particularly those who are at more of a risk of experiencing these mental health impacts. The LGBTQ community being one of those who's particularly vulnerable. So what to consider? Simply put, many LGBTQ folks already struggle with mental health issues. This is a result of a variety of things, including existing stigma, discrimination, a lack of access to critical resources, including healthcare, housing, and employment. And LGBTQ individuals still lack federal protections from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So research clearly has demonstrated that LGBTQ folks are significantly more likely to experience things like anxiety and depression. A very recent study, I think it just came out last week in the Journal of Endocrine Society, demonstrated that 2 out of 3 transgender teens experiences depression. And that transgender adults are at a much higher risk of suicidal ideation. So nearly half of transgender adults reported suicidal ideation in the last 12 months, compared to just 4% of the general population. So in the face of COVID-19, in addition to the social predisposition that we have to experience mental health issues, LGBTQ individuals can experience those additional stressors that can impact mental health. So surgery, treatment, cancellations, and delays we've touched on a little bit, but also COVID-19 can disrupt important social support connections that actually mitigate some of the impact that stigma and discrimination can have on depression and suicidality for LGBTQ individuals. Furthermore, as we have seen in the past with the 2008 financial crisis, higher levels of suicidality correspond with rising unemployment rates. And we've seen with COVID-19 and what we talked about earlier, LGBTQ individuals are already facing higher rates of unemployment. And we're beginning to see that disproportionate financial impact on LGBTQ individuals in the face of COVID-19. So in all of this, it's really important that employers understand the unique mental health challenges facing the LGBTQ community and respond accordingly. We all want to make sure that employees are healthy, safe, and feel supported by their companies. So here are a few things that you can do. Again, monitor and support well-being through ERG engagement. We can't stress this enough. We mentioned how ERGs are emerging as key touchstones in monitoring the emotional well-being of their members. Many of you may be a member of your ERG and have already experienced how they can serve as important mechanisms to virtually connect and cope with the isolation effect caused by COVID-19. So we are really recommending that companies encourage their ERGs to facilitate regular virtual check-ins with their membership to assess well-being. It could be a simple routine time period allocated each week to touch base on a specific check-in question. ERGs can also connect on shared coping skills and identify specific workplace-related needs and concerns. Outneek will actually be doing a webinar on May 11th on the subject of mental health, where we'll be touching on some ways your ERGs can get involved in the mental health and well-being of your member base. So please check that out. We'll post a link for it. I believe in a few slides you'll see that, and hopefully you'll join us. If you'll just go one more slide over, Karina. It's really important to provide LGBTQ specific mental health resources at this time. We've shared a few here on this screen. The Trevor Lifeline being one of them. This is an LGBTQ specific crisis intervention and suicide prevention phone service. This is conducted by the Trevor Project 24/7 for young adults in crisis. Actually, too, the Trevor Project has indicated that calls to their service have nearly doubled since the pandemic has started. These services are important, and it's going to be important for you to share these with your employees. Two others, Sage LGBT Elder Hotline. This is a 24-hour hotline dedicated to LGBTQ older folks needing support or dealing with crises. And then the Trans Lifeline. This is a peer support service line for trans folks in crisis run by trans identified individuals that's also operating 24/7. So we've posted the numbers here. They're also shared in our resource, but we encourage you to share those with your employees during this crisis to make sure they have resources to check out. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dina and we'll do some more Q&A. Thanks all for your patience.
Yeah, thank you, Madeline. It's such a vital subject. So reading glasses on, and I'm seeing another point being raised, which I think is part of this larger puzzle. For those of us with jobs where we can go virtual, where we're broadcasting out of our homes, there's a different level of possible revelation about our family structure, even the physical space in which we're living. One of our participants notes things like artwork or other elements, you know, a pride flag, something in the background that is not part of your normal workstation that now potentially your colleagues can see. I think that what holds true in a non-COVID setting also holds true now, which is one, fundamentally, we encourage you to find support. If you're not in a place to be able to have that conversation, whether it's to talk about being an LGBTQ person with colleagues, find support. Certainly the hotlines that Madeline Jelpy shared are valuable. Many of you are working for companies that have an EAP, an employee assistance program. And so if some of these stressors are becoming acute, those are all resources for you. And then most certainly employee resource groups. Employee resource groups and Out and Equal. You know, we are going to continue to have these virtual platforms to stay connected. We know that some of you may not have as much access to an ERG, and you need a space to just sort of let the proverbial hair down, just chat with like-minded folks. I also want to note a category of employees that I'm not sure we've touched on very directly, which would be family members and allies of the LGBTQ community. For every um, level of impact that we've talked about in the course of this call, think about replacing LGBTQ employee with parent of. You know, a parent of a 16-year-old who right now is struggling and can't access the adequate health care that that child has looked for and needed as they undergo a gender transition. Think about those who have partners who are HIV positive, and now all of a sudden the decision is, how do we disclose our household dynamic to either or both employers when talking about reasonable accommodations? So we really do encourage our employee resource groups and our networks to take that Big Ten approach. Ensure that you're providing this information not only to those you know are LGBTQ, but also those more broadly who are not necessarily members of the community, but have absolute deep personal investment and are potentially sharing some of these stressors right now. I'm going to take one moment here to check our chat box. I'm seeing some additional questions come in. Yeah, so sounds like this is sort of a common concern or set of questions. You know, how do we have our coworkers see our home life? You know, in my case, it's my wife potentially traipsing back and forth, or my stepchildren. Now, thankfully, I work for Out and Equal and can bring my authentic self and speak casually about, you know, needing to go on pause to help our middle schooler with homework. But I know that not everybody is in that situation. And so, again, we're here for you. And there are other networks potentially within your agency or company that can help. More and more companies not only have sort of identity-based groups like an LGBTQ and allied employee resource group, but also a parents group. And, you know, I would say that as much as some of these unique challenges might be hitting our communities or intersectional identities very hard right now, I've also seen firsthand across our partners an abundance of compassion and empathy, and hopefully some of those wells are available to you. So looking through the chat right now, so a question or a shared experience here for someone transitioning. This is great. So one person has shared their experience of being able to transition and find support across their employee resource group leadership, as well as their direct manager. And again, you know, if there are individual concerns that you're facing right now, whether because you're in transition or you're having to potentially share your household in a way that you didn't before, a lot of those same self-assessments apply even in these most unusual of circumstances. Do you have a trusted colleague or friend that you can talk to? Is your manager generally supportive of inclusion? Is it a level of connection and relationship that that would not be completely out of the norm for you to disclose and open up about some of these additional stressors you're facing? Somebody's brought up something that is vital and that I think we will add to the resource that we share, and that's the matter of domestic violence. We know categorically, actually around the world right now, that documented rates of domestic violence have ratcheted up virtually everywhere that it's measured. And we also know that the matter of LGBTQ domestic violence is often underreported for fear of stigma, for fear that that law enforcement won't take the appropriate action. in general sense that unfortunately a lot of people have the misconception that because of different gender dynamics, domestic violence doesn't occur. And in fact, it does. There are also matters of with family members at home, you may have had, for example, a child able to be their authentic selves at university and coming home, and you have one parent not accepting the fact that they're genderqueer. So all of these different dynamics might be taking place right now. I think Madeline Jelpy, you've also raised this. We will add to the hotline and available resources some of the particularly LGBTQ culturally competent domestic violence resources. Question, I believe, for Madeline Jelpy regarding the ERG survey that was referenced. Is that a reference that you can either put in the chat box or speak to?
Yeah, I will put it in the chat box. It's also going to be referenced in our slides at the end. At the moment, I'm blanking exactly on who produced that ERG survey, but we'll ensure that we get that to you. In fact, I'll go ahead and put that in the chat box now.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks for that question too.
Yeah. We've got about 13 minutes left. Are there any additional questions? We'll give folks just another moment or two. And I will also put in the chat box, if after this call or you reflect on it or you mention that you were on this call to a friend or a colleague, you have additional questions, that email inbox is hello@outandequal.org. Again, that's hello@outandequal.org. There's actually a fantastic question that has come up regarding the prospect of companies wanting to divest resources from their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Suffice to say that so much of what we do is devoted to articulating not just that human case for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but also the business case. So I think because we don't have quite enough time to cover the multitude of studies and resources that affirm the need to preserve DEI initiatives, we will include that in the follow-up, and also know that many of the upcoming virtual learnings, expert guest speakers, peer-to-peer corporate and federal agency testimonials will all speak to that. But in a nutshell, companies that divest money away from diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are in effect divesting resources away from their number one asset, and that's their people. And so while there may be some short-term satisfaction in cutting some corners there, in the long run, we know, some of us having done DEI work through economic downturns, we know that firms that do that are set up to be in much weaker positions once the immediacy of the crisis passes. So thank you for asking that question. And again, we can have a more extended conversation over these different mediums. Okay, great. And one last, I think, hopeful comment before we get to our closeout here is the comment that more employee resource group members are getting connected and getting involved by helping their community. There's something so bright and optimistic there, and I think many of us might know even as individuals that when much in the world feels out of our control, what can we control? Well, we can control our own spirit, our own generosity, our compassion, and our ability to help others. So with that, let me pass the baton right back to Madeline Jelpy, and then we will close out the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. And thanks all for your questions. These are really important pieces of information to chat about together. I did see one additional question on check-in questions to ask your ERGs at this time. Out and Equal will be putting out resources throughout this period of outbreak to support your ERGs. And that's one of the things we'll address in that resource, and making sure that you all are prepared to have these conversations with your ERGs. One thing that we wanted to do before we ended this call today, and as we look towards the future and creating more resources for you all, is understanding what ERGs are doing now to sustain momentum or support members during the pandemic. We have quite a lot of people on this call today, and it would be really interesting for everyone to share some of the things that you're doing. Share the wealth of knowledge, share the innovative things that you're doing together to work through this pandemic. So if you want to utilize the chat box, that would be great. And I'll read some of the answers we get to sort of get a sense of what you are all doing now as COVID-19 has affected our day-to-days. So I'll wait and check out the chat box over here. Okay, so we have someone doing newsletters with tips on movies, series, and books to read. Awesome. Virtual meetings and support. Collaborative coffee chats, that's great. Zoom game night with friends, wonderful. Out and Equal, we're doing some Zoom things like that, and it's great for team building. Lunch break check-ins, virtual happy hours, but also being sure that that can be triggering for some folks in recovery, okay. Virtual trivia nights, wonderful. Mental health webinars, virtual chats. Using internal social media channels to maintain communication on stories about how we are giving back to the community. Tips on working from home, that's wonderful. Virtual photo.
I saw another one that was really great to call out: collaborating with other ERGs in our company.
That's excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of power in ERG work, and to combine that with the various ERGs at your company is really great. I like this one: a queer online movie club and Zoom discussion. Something to think about for Pride Month coming up. Great. Just continuing to read through these awesome things you are all doing. Great. Collaborating with ERGs and a similar government entity. Ooh, a weekly update of queer culture, books, movies, and musicians. Keeping things queer as you keep working. Wonderful. Awesome. Virtual scavenger hunt. I'm really curious about that one. If you want to send in details about how you're doing that, that sounds really great. Well, thank you all so much. These are wonderful. If you want to continue to chat these in, Out and Equal is going to look at ways that we can share these all with you all after the call to make sure that we capture these incredible things that you're doing to persevere through the pandemic and sharing together. You know, we can all do more when we collectively think, and we can all, be better through this crisis if we have camaraderie on this. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dina, and thanks again for joining us today. Dina, I'll let you close us out.
Terrific, thank you. And we've included on here the landing page for all of our additional online resources. This is also where you can go to check out those webinars that we're putting on, those virtual community spaces and virtual learning spaces that are open to the public. It is outandequal.org/virtual-offerings. Again, outandequal.org/virtual-offerings. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and I'll close out with heartfelt thanks for what you all do to also sustain each other and us at least 4 or 5 times a day. As colleagues at Out and Equal, we turn to each other and say, wow, I feel so much more optimistic after that call. And it's with one of our partners, be they in Shanghai, in Sao Paulo, or in Phoenix, Arizona. So thank you all. And lastly, I would say that if you feel safe, One thing that you can do in the next hour, say, is tell a friend, a neighbor, or a colleague about the call you were just on. Um, I think sometimes we can forget that we have the opportunity to be the first experience someone has of hearing about LGBTQ issues in a respectful and kind manner. And so that colleague that you happen to mention this to might actually be a dad of a lesbian daughter who had no idea that you were could be a safe space and a colleague and someone to support him at this time. So if you do nothing else, as long as you feel safe doing it, letting somebody know that this was valuable enough to you that you spent an hour out of your day to talk about LGBTQ inclusion. You just may fundamentally change somebody's day, maybe their relationship to you, and quite possibly their lives. So thank you all. Check back as we are in fact rolling out these virtual offerings and community convenings at least a few times a week. And final note that we will, of course, be distributing the PowerPoint deck, the additional resources we talked about, and the recording of this. So thank you all.